Hey guys, and welcome to the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report. Joe and I sat together with a couple of the local guides that contribute to our podcast and have so much knowledge on this expertise area. We sat down with Dustin Bedgood, Angelo, DePaola, Chris Vecsey, and we really extracted some awesome swordfish knowledge, all the way from getting the boat ready to the type of reel and rod and rigging, fighting these fish. We think it's going to be a really cool segment. As you guys know, Joe and I are obsessed with swordfish, as are some of these guys. We get into depth on daytime deep dropping for these swordfish and things like that. You guys sit back, enjoy this special that was recorded a couple weeks ago at the Mobile Boat Show, and let us know if you have any questions. This week's special show is brought to us by Foster Contracting. The recent thunderstorms that have been producing wind and hail in the area may have damaged your home's roof. The certified roofing pros at Foster Contracting offer free roof inspections, and if your roof has received damage, most homeowners will have little or no cost out of pocket when going through your insurance. If you're looking for a quality construction with a dependable, licensed, and certified fortified roofing professional, give the Fortified Roofing Pros a call at 251-973-9999. They're a family-owned business that is big enough to get the job done, but small enough to care. Remember to support the local businesses that make this podcast possible each week. Check them out at fortifiedroofingpros.com. Also brought to you by Hilton's Offshore Charts. The days of heading out blindly looking for good fishing areas are pretty much over. Don't waste time and money on fuel searching for fish. You need the most recent, highest resolution images to not only know where to go, but where not to go. The knowledge provided by today's technology is critical when planning an offshore fishing trip. Make the choice that professional captains all over the Gulf make and choose Hilton's Real-Time Navigator. The easy-to-use interface and excellent customer service will have you on the fish every time you go out. Check it out at hiltonsoffshore.com. Also brought to you by KillerDock. I've suffered from dock dysfunction for years, and I didn't think that I could ever get relief. I've gotten used to the dirty wood on my fish cleaning table and the heat of the sun baking my skin. I looked around and all my friends were afflicted by dock dysfunction as well. I felt helpless. But now, KillerDock brings a dock enhancement that not only will put an end to my suffering, it will make being on my dock enjoyable again. KillerDock combines durability, function, and design to uniquely upgrade your entire dock experience. Visit KillerDock.com to check it out for yourself. Also brought to you by the Alabama Fishing Rodeo. You don't have to spend tons of money to compete in a fishing tournament. The Alabama Fishing Rodeo is an inexpensive way to get out fishing with the family and friends. You can fish from a boat, kayak, the beach, or the pier. All ages can compete in the tournament, and there are tons of great prizes. This year's rodeo will be June 12th through June 14th, and it's easy to register. Just go to fishflorabama.com for tickets and find out more. You guys keep whacking them. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report, coming to you live from the Mobile Boat Show. And today we got a special show. Butch, this is a selfish show for me.
Me too. That's okay.
You. I've been looking forward to sitting down with these three guys for a while now.
What about me? I don't count on that.
No, you are not on the list.
Rude.
You know, one of my favorite fish to target personally is a swordfish. I think that they're unmatched when it comes to fighting. When they want to fight, they're just an unbelievable fish. They're cool, they're mysterious, but the only time I've ever caught them has been at night. And so the daytime sword fishing bite is something that is new to me. I've never done it. I've never been a part of it, but I know that it's all the rage, and it can be done consistently. And so today on the show, we're bringing on three of the most respected daytime sword fishing anglers here along the Gulf Coast. We got Angelo DePaola joining us. How you doing, Angelo?
Doing great, man. Doing great.
Chris Vecsey. How you doing, Chris? And Dustin Bedgood. All right, guys. So today what we want to do is break down for anyone that is considering starting daytime sword fishing. We want to hit on some fundamentals. And then for some guys that have been daytime sword fishing, I think we're going to get into some nuance and learn some of your tips and your techniques and things that maybe have taken you 10 or 15 years of doing this to learn. So let's start out by doing this. Angelo, tell me about the first swordfish you caught, and then tell me when you started daytiming.
So the first swordfish I caught, I don't know, probably 15, 16 years ago. We were in a 21-foot Cape Horn at the spur. We had 2 TLD 25s and 1 Shrimp International 30. And we had some rigged mackerel that we'd caught. We had some squid that we didn't really know how to rig. And then we had one hook that we just put about 7 or 8 red snapper squid on there. And that night we caught 85-pound wahoo on the rig with the red snapper squid. And one thing about sword fishing was that, like, if you got a bite and missed it, they would come back and eat another bait. So we were like missing, I'm pretty sure, the same fish. And what was interesting, the first fish I ever caught had a tag. I've never caught a tagged one since.
That's awesome.
What about you, Chris?
Honestly, my first swordfish, it was probably around 15 years ago as well, but that's not the one that sticks with my first swordfish I hooked. The first one I ever rigged a bait, put down, and hooked. That's the one that actually sticks with me because that one put a fire in me towards them. We were North Petronius around the steps, and I only had 2 lines out, 2 squid out. One at about 125 feet, a little bit above the thermocline that night, and one at 200. Well, the shallow bait ends up getting hit, and a little bit into the second run, it ends up breaking off. I learned a valuable lesson in rigging that night. Here's where the grudge came is, we use a lot of lights, of course, both daytime and night fishing. Well, at that point, we were fishing mostly not only bigger fixed lights, but big strobes. I mean, you could see these things from quite a depth down. Well, this swordfish decided to mosey to the boat. And, you think, okay, he's going to come in, he's going to check the boat. No, he stayed there for almost an hour. And during that period, we tried baiting him. We tried doing all kinds of things. I'd reeled up the 200-foot bait and kept it at about maybe 60 feet under the boat. And we watched that swordfish go to it and circle it and go away from it and come back to it for about 30 minutes and not eat.
Terrible.
And that was one of the most aggravating evenings. That fish actually, I feel, sticks with me more than the first one I landed. So I'd like to say the debt has been settled. No, it hasn't, and it never will be.
Yeah.
What about you, Dustin?
So I haven't been sword fishing, that long. My first swordfish was probably 5 years ago at night at the spur. And we caught, we got to where we were catching swordfish pretty consistently at night. And we really stopped doing it after we, felt accomplished with it. And then the daytime really got me about 3 years ago. And in the last 2 years, that's all I can think about. And I get to go a lot. So I get to spend a good bit of time out there. And I think that's all it takes to do it this time.
Yeah,
for sure.
What about you, Mr. Butch?
Oh, man. Sword fishing's a pretty new, relatively for as long as these guys have been fishing, it's a pretty new thing.
I remember the first one I ever heard of, your brother caught.
I think the first one I ever caught was probably at night on the Lady End, like fishing a tournament. And
you're probably like,
we would just put baits down. Like it was a unicorn, for years and years and years. I mean, I started catching them pretty good, like you say. Actually, I do remember the first one I ever caught. It drug me around the entire Lady End. I had to go up on the bow. I was the only one awake, which is not safe. Sorry, Dad. Going under the pulpit, he drug me around the whole boat. Had to go. It wasn't a very big one, probably about 70, 75 pounds. I've caught 3 where I hooked them, reeled them in, and somebody else gaffed them, which is for a deck can. That's a lot. I've never.
Yeah, and
what about you?
Well, my first one that I caught was at the Petronius when they used to have the buoy there.
The best swordfish spot ever.
Love that buoy.
Yeah.
But that like with you, Chris, that's not the one that sticks out in my mind. And
yeah, me neither.
The one that sticks out in my mind, they're just such a mysterious fish. Like you just never know if they're going to be angry or docile or what.
Agreed.
And the one that really sticks out in my mind is we were over off the spur and hooked a fish at night, and that fish came in less than 10 minutes. Never pulled drag. It was a big heavy weight. Didn't know what was going on. Didn't know if we had a shark. Kind of felt like a shark, And then all of a sudden he just pops up, and he was about 150 to 175 pounds. We never did get a live weight because we gutted him, but that fish popped up right next to the boat, and I harpooned him. I mean, bam. Live, as green as could be. I drilled him right dead center. And that is when he decided to make his mark. And
realized he was hooked at that point?
He popped off the harpoon, and I threw the harpoon down and grabbed the harpoon line and started pulling.
So you got the dart in him?
Got the dart in him.
Okay.
And I started pulling him to the boat. And one of the other deckhands came over, and he was a green deckhand, and he was just coming in normal, no big deal, and the guy comes over the gunnel and hits the swordfish on the head with the back of the gaff, did not sink the gaff in the fish, and he lost it. He ran his bill into the running gear, broke his bill off, came under the boat with me still holding on to the harpoon line, and cleared the water, jumped out of the water with me holding on to him like this. Almost pulled me in the water. It happened that fast. So I've got an immense respect for the fish because of what they are capable of doing. But again, getting back to daytime, and that's what we really want to focus on today, is how do we get away from having to be out there at night, sitting up at 2 o'clock in the morning praying for a bite? How can we methodically approach getting after these fish in the daytime? So let's talk about that a little bit, and let's first talk about the bite itself, okay? So I want you guys to break down, when you are setting up a daytime sword fishing trip, is there a time of year, and then is there a solunar time that you feel is better for daytime? And let's start with you, Dustin.
So I've, as I've said before, I prefer, and I think the best time for me is, April through October. And I don't know that is when the fishing is best necessarily, or necessarily the case with it, but I spend a lot of time out there in those months because that's when I fish the most. That's when I have customers, and that's when I'm in that area. I do like to fish around the moon set. If the moon set's in the daytime, I like to be fishing around it if it's in the middle of the day especially. I like to fish on a new moon. But I feel like I've definitely caught fish on all moon phases. No matter what the moon's doing, but I have seen there are times when you can go out there and just you can try not to and still get a bite. If you get the bait down there, you're going to get bit.
So Chris, Angelo, with what he's saying, he's not necessarily saying he knows April to October to be the best time. That's just when he's been out there the most. Have y'all fished in that November to March period?
I tell you, the first one I ever caught daytiming was in January, the last day of January. I don't think there's any
season.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier to get out there April through October. The weather's better. And it's a heck of a lot easier if it's not blowing 15, 20 knots. I mean, because you're kind of trying to hold up over not a small spot, but relatively small for what you're trying to, size of a football field kind of area. So if you have a lot of current and wind, that can be difficult.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a time of year thing. It's a conditions. We want to look for conditions. So talking about that, break down for folks that are new to this. When you're daytime sword fishing, what depths are you going to be at, and particularly what area? So the Ram Powell, it's 6,000 feet deep at the Ram Powell or something like that. But then right there at the spur. What are we looking for with regards to underwater topography, and where are we finding these fish with regards to depths during the daytime?
I mean, pretty much any live bottom area will hold them. Any kind of anomaly along the bottom, whether it's a sharp contour or even just an area of soft coral growth or a big, limestone dome, the most important thing with finding a swordfish is finding bait. If there's no food in an area, they will not hold in that area. But as far as depths go, I mean, touching back on what you're, as far as best times, there's not a month of the year I haven't caught a swordfish. And you can literally fish from year round. But I do believe that not only does the location change, but depth will change depending on. I don't think it's as much. Temperature, because the temperatures down there seem to be pretty consistent. But I do think the moon plays a lot of that. I notice on a full moon, for example, I fish deeper in the daytime, especially if I've got, if the moon sets, say, early in the morning or even before sunup, I'll fish anywhere from 15 to 1,700 feet, sometimes as deep as 18. Whereas if I have a moonrise in the middle of the day and I've had a pretty dark sky at night, I'll fish anywhere from 1,100 to 1,400 feet. But the key thing to any of it is it's finding bait. And, Dustin was saying, getting your bait down there. The most important thing with any of it is you've got to get your bait in front of one of those fish. They're extremely aggressive. They have very fast metabolisms. They're going to eat if you can get your bait in front of them. But you're also talking about finding a needle in a haystack. You're now fishing for one fish a quarter mile underneath you.
All right, so let's talk about that bait. Now, when I think about finding bait, I'm always like, there's some mullet on top of the water over there, or there's some flying fish. When it comes to finding bait for swordfish, what are you looking for?
Pretty much big. You'll see them almost like big clouds, like you'd see them in shallower water. I've got a bunch of screenshots on my phone. Obviously, that doesn't help here for this. This recording.
No, show everybody.
Huh?
Show everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, show everybody. I hope everybody can see it. But yeah, you're still just looking for big clouds of bait, and a lot of time, I mean, I've got a bunch of shots where you see bait, and then you see one or two very big, solid marks. And most of the time, if you're marking something that large at that depth, it's usually a swordfish.
And also with the bait is a lot of times I'm looking for the bait down deep, also the squid or whatever it may be. But also I found that a lot of times when I'm fishing in an area that I find a lot of fish and are real successful, there's a lot of bait on the surface too. It's not just looking for the bait on. A lot of times when I'm being real successful fishing along the edge, there's tons of activity on the top, lots of bonitas. Also, as he was talking, fishing the different depths, I think that you can fish as deep as you want to. They're out there. You can fish as deep as you want to if you can find contour. And also, I like to fish anywhere that I can find bottom. I like to be able to find bottom when I'm fishing. Even if I'm fishing, deeper than 1,700 or 1,800 foot, if I can find bottom, I feel comfortable fishing. But I do believe that you can daytime as deep as you want to go in the right areas.
I tell you, for me, I think the sweet spot is somewhere around 1,200 to 1,500 foot, like if you're going to consistently catch them. But I've caught them in 800 foot. I've caught them in 1,800 foot. So, and like Chris said, the bait is key. And you're really looking for hard bottom. We've got a few places off Alabama and Pensacola, but if you fish back towards the west, the mouth of the river, either side of it, there's a ton of it out there.
Much more structured.
And if you mark the bait, you're almost guaranteed you're going to get a bite. And if you don't mark the bait, you're almost guaranteed you're not going to get a bite.
So, of course, the most important thing is getting a bait in front of one of these fish. We've established that, and we're going to look for bait. And maybe it sounds like the 20% that produces 80% of the results with regards to depth is probably that 12 to 1,500 foot depth range.
Yeah.
But let's talk about setting up and how we're actually fishing, because when you're talking about putting a bait down 1,200 feet deep, there's a lot of factors that go into doing that successfully and not getting a tangle or not,
Seems like a disaster, really.
I know,
It can
I'd
be.
screw it up.
It
It's
can
really
be a disaster.
It's really fun out of a kayak, let me tell you.
I'm sure.
So-
It can definitely be a disaster trying to deploy your baits.
So Dustin, let's start with you, and I want you to talk about what are the factors that go into setting up and correct me if I'm wrong, but setting up a drift.
Yeah.
So
Do you usually fish two?
So we were talking about that earlier. I've gotten to where if I fish, when I'm sword fishing, I usually fish at least two baits. Sometimes I'll get brave and fish three. But when you do that and hook a fish, you're setting yourself up for disaster because there's a lot more that can go wrong by hooking other lines. But just starting out, fish one bait. The easiest way to deploy a bait is to sacrifice a weight, in my opinion. You have your boat dead still, or over your spot, up current of your spot. After you find your drift, and do a breakaway system where we use coat hangers or 8-pound tests with cinder blocks, rebar, anything you could use. I've tried everything. The best thing to do if you're using a breakaway is number 11 rebar for me. I'll tape a coat hanger on it with a slight bend, put it around my hook, drop it down. I'll attach my weight that I'm going to keep on, and I'll send it straight to the bottom as fast as I can. But you can't. It has to be the correct weight so your lead doesn't pass your rebar or your sacrifice weight. So I like to send it as fast as I can, hit bottom and break that away, and then you're there. Now mostly I troll my bait out just because I've figured out the best way to do it for me. Trolling it out saves me all those sacrifice weights, having to have all that on the boat. I still carry a few for certain situations, but I like to troll my bait out. And I feel like that since I started trolling my bait out, I get more bites on the fall. Like I'm catching that fish's attention as that bait is falling down in front of me.
Explain what you mean by troll my bait out.
What I trolling the bait out is I get in the current, drive into the current. I'll feed my bait out, drop my weight, and I'll drive away at usually about 5 to 6 knots. But I'll set my autopilot if I don't have anybody with me to help me. I'll set it just the way I want it, have my boat set in the right heading, and I'll feed that bait out. And it's a lot of feel, but I try to get it out as fast as I can. Once I get a certain amount of line out, I'll circle back around on top of it and let it come tight under the boat. And I try to keep my line as straight up and down as possible because that's the easiest way to see the bite for me. Anytime you get any scope in your line, it's just a lot harder to see the bite. And that you have to change your weight a lot to get it dialed in just right.
Angelo, Chris, you guys got anything to add to that?
I like the sled. To me, that's the easiest way. It gets you exactly where you need to be. But I want to circle back on the depth because we kind of talked about water depth that we were fishing in. But once you get, how far off the bottom do you fish, right? Like, to me, that's more important than, like, the actual water depth. So once you found the spot, that's where you need to figure out how far you want that bait.
Yeah, are we just always putting it right on the bottom, or?
I can tell you for me, on a lot of spots, you put that bait right on the bottom. Yeah, two things that can occur. A, there's a bunch of critters down there that eat your bait.
Oh, yeah.
Number two, a lot of those spots have coral or something on them, and your weight that you keep on your line to keep the bait down there will almost always get hung up, and it's a big mess. So what I like to do, because I fish 2 rods, I fish with guys that fish 1, but I like 2 because I like to hold over the same spot. We fish 1 50 foot up off the bottom. I take a little Rapala line counter, and I reel that first bait 50 feet off the bottom. And I don't fish a balloon on my second bait. I fish the second one straight out off the tip of the rod too. And so I either do one of two things. A lot of times you can mark the thermocline. So what you want to do is adjust your bottom machine, turn up the gain a little, and zoom in on the bottom 100 to 500 foot of the water. That thermocline's usually somewhere in there.
What are you looking for when you see that thermocline?
Well, a lot of times you'll see the bait sitting on it, and there's a couple spots that, well, a lot of times the current's different on the bottom than it is on the surface. And like if you're fishing something with a lot of topography coming up off the bottom, you can actually see the current blowing over the top of like a hill or something. And when it does that, man, the bait just stacks up right there. So like, you're like, okay, that one's 150 foot off the bottom, so I'm going to reel my bait into that thermocline. That's pretty instantaneous bites when you're in that situation. If I don't mark the thermocline, I reel it 200 foot off the bottom and fish it there. So that like the fish 150 foot in between baits, they're going to be able to see the lights either way. So you're going to get bites. And then I've seen guys that fish 1 rod and kind of bump troll over the structure. And what's happening then is that bait is yo-yoing up and down because you're kind of, as you're in the turn or you're slowing down, it's going up and down. It gives you the same effect. For me, I find it easier to hold than to try to constantly find that structure as I'm bumping.
All right, guys, so we've covered where the bite occurs when you're daytiming. We talked about where to find these fish and how to get your bait in front of them. We talked a little bit about technique, whether you're talking about trolling your bait out and how to get your bait down there and get it in front of them without getting the tangle, without getting hung up on the bottom. Now I really want to talk about rigging. And so let's break it down this way. Let's look at it from rod to reel to line, all the way down to the bait and what somebody's going to need to get started. So swordfish, one of the things that's amazing to me about swordfish is a 70-pound swordfish can be a mean dude. And so you really got to think about when you're tackling up for these fish. I mean, I cannot imagine hooking a fish that's 400 plus pounds.
No,
I don't even know what to really expect with that. Like, do you need to step up into 80 class gear? I mean, we've caught them obviously on 50 class gear. Apparently Angelo catches them on TLDs and boat rods with 2-hook rigs, snapper fishing. But where do you feel like is a sweet spot for rods and reels?
When you drop that bait down, you don't get to pick what size fish you hook. You could use a theory of big bait, big fish. You're just as likely to start getting hits from 80 and the 90-pound fish on a small bait or on a big bait, and then catch a 400-pounder on a 8-inch squid. So you have to be prepared for anything that's going to hit. I consider 50 class a bare minimum. Realistically, it needs to be between, if you're fishing manual gear anyway, hand crank gear, 50 is a minimum. 80 is probably more like it, just for the added power, capacity, and something a lot of people don't think about, and I explain in our shop all the time, is I have guys that, can I do it with a 30 wide? Well, yeah, absolutely you can, but the issue is to put appropriate size line on there, you have X amount of yardage. You have enough yards to get down there, but you don't think about the fact that when you get down there, now you have hardly any line left on the reel. So your retrieve rate is now very slow, for one, and you're actually putting that much more pressure on the gearing, on the drag, everything. You don't have a lot of power at that point. So it's not the effective tool. It's better to go ahead and step up, get the right rod and reel. Me personally, the reel I like to use is an International 70. I consider it just about perfect because it has a little bit more gradual drag curve, and it's a narrow frame reel. It balances nice in a stand-up outfit. It's got a taller frame, so it eats up line quicker. But anything between that 50 and 80 size is fine. Then, of course, there's a whole host of electrics, which I'm sure we'll get into the debate on that later. The rod, I would say the rod is probably the most important part of it. it needs to obviously have sufficient enough backbone to land a fish that you may be fighting with, 25, 30 pounds of drag for hours on end, but you still have to have that soft tip, because you think of this giant swordfish down there hitting your bait. You think of this, rod doubling over, line screaming off. Most of the time, that's not what it is. It's a slight tap on the end of the rod. You need to be able to see that bite to know you're getting bit, and then be able to react to the fish if need be, whether it's teasing the bait, dropping the bait back. So, I could touch on all kinds of brands. There's a lot of different rods that'll work good for daytime swordfish. The key thing is a strong butt section, but a relatively soft tip on it.
Makes a lot of sense. Dustin, what do you guys run on your boat?
So we do fish a little bit of electric setups. I like for my customers to fish hand cranks as much as possible to get the true experience from the fish. I feel like the fish deserves it. I like a 50. I do fish 80s. I fish Tiagra on 50 usually. I'll fish 65-pound braid or 80. I've fished the J-braid, the Power Pro, all different ones, and I don't necessarily have one I prefer over the other. I've had some issues with some. I felt like it would just break on me once I had that much line out, maybe have a bad spot in it. That's a lot to do with taking care of your tackle and keeping your line fresh. The rod, I fished some heavier rods. I prefer a lighter rod for where we're fishing with the current we have and the amount of weight that I usually fish. The guys down in South Florida, they fish a heavier rod because they're using a lot of weight to hold their bait down. But I like the 50 for size, especially in a harness. But the 80 is probably the better tool.
I tell you, to me, I feel like 80 is just overpowered for most of the fish. Like our fish, a big one here in the Gulf is like 150-pound fish. It's a pretty good fish. A lot of them are in that 70 to 100-pound range and even less. And occasionally you're going to get one 200 north of 200. I've probably caught a half dozen over 200, and I think I fished a pretty good bit for them. With that being said, the biggest one I ever caught was on a 50 Tiagra, and we were never with 80-pound braid, top shotted with about 200 yards of mono. We were never in any question of losing that fish. Of since, for me, I like the Talica 50. The reason being is it has super high gear ratio, so you can retrieve much faster. If you're going to use the Tiagras or the Penn Internationals, they're geared a little differently. A real cranky works real good on them. I one time had two guys hand crank the Tiagra up just to check the bait versus a real cranky, and you can hand crank the Talica up faster than you can with the real cranky. And people complain about the biggest thing is having to check baits and stuff. You get 2-3 guys on a boat, you just take turns, baits up and down real quick. On the rods, honestly, I use my trolling rods as my swordfish rods. I just don't have a dedicated setup for that, and I don't have any problem seeing the bite.
Come on, Angelo, stop being cheap. Go down to Sam's. It's just paper with faces on it to you, man.
That's right.
I want to. It's just it's a good swordfish rod's $400 or $500 rod, and I just don't think you have to have that.
That's almost on the cheap end nowadays.
Yeah.
There's definitely low, little bit less expensive options now that more actual factory rod manufacturers are making sword sticks, and I've used, like Angelo saying, a lot of the rods I troll with, I've used them sword fishing plenty of times. The main thing is seeing the bite. As long as you can see the bite on whatever rod you're using, you should be fine.
So we're talking a little bit about the right size reel.
Yeah, we got our rod and reel.
And track back, Chris, you mentioned 25 to 30 pounds of drag. Now, so I'm assuming that let's step away from the equipment considerations here for a second, because Dustin, you were talking about catching these fish on a 50 wide on stand-up gear. Now, what most of us guys, Butch and I, novices that we are in this realm, we're used to when we've got a 50 wide on, we're talking maybe 15 pounds of drag.
Yeah, maybe.
15.
So we step up in braid, we're stepping up in line strength, which means we can step up in our drag strength. But when you start putting 25 pounds of drag, 30 pounds of drag, and then hooking up in stand-up gear,
some pressure.
There's some pressure going on.
Yeah.
So let's talk about safety considerations a little bit. What do y'all do when you've got that much? Because, you wrap a tip with 25 pounds of drag, you're in the water.
Well, we always have a safety line on the rod and reel for one. That way, if somebody does get pulled over, for whatever reason, then we can. You're actually pulling on the rod, not on the person. It's actually backwards. Some people will put a safety line on themselves. It's not what you want to do. You want to put the rod and reel. That way, you're pulling on the rod to where the person in that harness could get out of it if need be. I've never seen somebody get pulled over by a swordfish, although we all know it has happened. Now, when I talk about 25, 30 pounds of drag, if you're not experienced in a stand-up harness, I don't believe you should do that. And there's always the drag debate. If you get on different forums, different Facebook pages, you're going to hear people talk about almost every extreme spectrum of drag when it comes to swordfish. You're going to hear about the soft mouths.
That's what I was about to say. We always hear, take it easy on them, have super light mouths.
I personally do not buy into the soft mouth thing. I start at 16 pounds, and I go up from there. I never go lighter. I believe a good hook set is a good hook set, and I don't want to find out 5 hours into a fight that my hook set was terrible and I've been babying it with 10 pounds of drag.
I love that.
Right.
And then
might as well find out immediately.
And then, what I've seen is guys that use real light drag, you get you don't know where the hook is.
Right.
You've been babying it and you've been keeping that hook could be on the outside of the mouth, it could be on the inside of the mouth, and it's staying there because of that light pressure. But what happens, you get it close to the boat. As we all know, as you get the line close to the boat, you have that much less shock absorbency.
Sure. Or get him on the leader.
Get him on the leader,
wire.
take one wrap, and guess what?
Pop.
Hook comes out. I'd rather jam up on the drag,
No doubt.
my hook is planted, and I really feel that not only do we land more fish because of that, but we land them quicker because we're not pussyfooting around with it.
Sure.
But you look at a swordfish, he has every physical advantage over you. They have very broad bodies. They're built more like a tuna than an average billfish. They're not flat. They're round across section. But he's got this giant planer built onto the front of his face. If you don't use appropriate size drag, or appropriate ranges of drag, even a 100-pounder will end up taking you hours on end when you should have been able to overpower that fish and get his head turned and get him to the boat. We land most fish in pretty reasonable times. Now, they are extremely strong. I'd say they have more staying power than any other big game fish I've caught. But that's more reason, in my opinion, to go ahead, find out what kind of hook set you have, use appropriate drag settings for the fish, and either pull the hook fast or keep it planted to keep his head coming towards you.
I like to hook my fish. I like when I get the bite and I feel like when I'm setting the hook, I like to set the hook with a little more drag up, around 25, and then I'll back it off and fight the fish at a lighter drag because, as he said, I want to set it hard. I want to set it hard, so if it's going to come out, it comes out then. But also, it's very dependent on whether I'm using the circle or the J hook. I will go a lot harder on my drag with the circle hook. Yep. Because once it's in the corner of that mouth, he's, it's in there. It's a good spot. On the J hook, not quite as much.
For me, and we talk about drags, like when we're fishing, we're at 15 to 18 pounds right from the get-go. And then I pretty much instantly want to go to 24 pounds once we're hooked up. And here's the thought process is you're down 1,000 to 1,800 feet below you. I mean, if we went stretched out 1,800 foot of line across Convention Center and you got on one end and I got it on the other end and pulled, we wouldn't hardly feel it. And so that's kind of some of the same concept there. As we get a little bit closer to the surface, at least on that first, as we get it up, I back off a little because you have less shock absorption. But I tell you what, I mean, you got a big fish, you had him on for 3 hours. I just assume let's go ahead and end it while we can end
Absolutely.
I feel the same way.
I'm bad about if a fish is fighting for a long time, if this fight is going on for over an hour, I'm always bumping the drag.
Yep.
Because, I've seen the big fish come in, quick enough that I know that I want to figure out what's going on. I want to know if I got a big shark or what. I want to figure it out. I don't want to sit there all day fighting a fish and then get a shark and I've spent 3 or 4 hours.
Or lose him 3 hours into the fight and you've
Yeah.
wasted 3 hours of your fishing time. And
Sure.
we talked about that on here several times with tuna. We've all had to scale down our leader material on tuna to get more consistent bites. So a lot of times we're fishing 60-pound, 80-pound fluorocarbon. And I always tell my guys, like, look, man, bust his ass from the beginning. Try to whip him. And if you lose him, great. Now we're still back on that same bite.
And a tuna bite, that is, it could be over in 15 minutes.
You fight a fish for 2 hours, you won't catch another tuna sometime.
I always tell anybody, it's like if you have to drop 10 pound on your leader material, you added 20 minutes, every time you do it. So, and Dustin touched on hook style, how he mentioned he'll go heavier on circles versus J's, and I'm the exact same way. And it's, if a circle's planted, if you come tight on a circle hook, if you come tight enough to where that fish is peeling drag off, the hook is in, it's going to be either the corner of the mouth, or with swords, sometimes you get them in the roof of the mouth. It's almost like back behind the palate. It kind of tucks in there, and sometimes you get them there. either way, if that hook finds its mark, very rarely will pull a circle hook. Now, here's where the circle versus J debate, of course, we'll get in there.
Let's go ahead and go there now. We got our rods, we got our reels, we got our drag set.
I would definitely say more people use J's. I think more people are confident in J's because, let's face the facts, if I take, Butch, you're only a few feet from me, but if I take a piece of fishing line with a J hook on it and I throw it, I could just fling it at you somewhere and then come tight on line, I'm going to hook you somewhere.
Right.
A circle hook, not so much. I've got to make sure it lands somewhere in particular on you.
Sure.
So that same aspect has happened down there. When a swordfish comes up and smacks at your bait, that J hook, without even necessarily being fed to the fish, might find its mark somewhere. Question is, you don't know where.
Right. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, is that a good thing? And we all know how the meat on a swordfish, the sides of it around its head, around its gill arches, is actually pretty soft. So if that hook plants somewhere outside of the mouth, the chance of that hook staying in, to me, are less. I've always found more confidence in a circle hook. I fished a long time with nothing but circle hooks. I'd throw in J's occasionally. But when I started daytime fishing, I had to retweak almost everything because a bite at 1,500, 1,600 feet is completely different than it is at 150 to 300 feet at night. The fish tend to be very aggressive. They want to swat at the bait a lot. You've got to feed them different with the circle than with the J. And I'm not going to lie, it had set me back to where I went back to J hooks and then had to gradually evolve back to using circle hooks. But now I'm where I've kind of found my hook. It's a Mustad 399/48. It's a very wide gap circle hook. If it finds its mark and you come tight on it, you can pull 100 pounds of pressure. The hook is not coming loose.
Yeah, I'm definitely more confident with a J hook. I try the circle hook, and I want to fish the circle hook because it is a better fight. But man, I am not the professional at hooking with a circle hook. I have a lot of confidence with the J hook, and a lot of times with my buoy rod, I'll fish a circle hook. But I really like the J hook, and especially for people that are learning how to do it, I would suggest the J hook to build your confidence.
Because no doubt there.
Because once you have the confidence, you're in a better spot to be productive sword fishing. Because with the circle hook, when I first started trying with a circle hook, it killed my confidence.
So, and again, only experience I have is nighttime fishing, but we used to, when we were rigging our baits, we were using circle hooks, I would notice that a lot of times, because you're dealing with real heavy fluorocarbon, leader material, we were crimping all our stuff on. It seemed like sometimes if you didn't just get just the right crimp or have it just right, that hook could get twisted a little bit, and sometimes it just didn't look right. It didn't look pretty, and I would lose confidence. Right. And so
you're talking about the circle hook, correct, Joe?
I'm talking about really, any hook, but specifically, like you said, I felt more confident that I didn't rig it just beautiful, that a J hook was probably going to find its mark, whereas if I had a little torque in it and twisted a little bit, that might affect the circle hook's capability. So are there any tips as we go to rigging, that you guys use to feel confident in your baits? I know, Angelo, you said, at this point in your life, you've been there, done that, and you like to just order them, right?
I mean, for me, I have two small kids. I have a job that's a little bit more than full-time. And I used to rig them all, and I find now that at the beginning of the year, you spend a couple $100. RJ Bull will send you up any kind of rigged baits you want. I like the bonita belly tacos. I like the mahi bellies.
So we're going to call this show bonita belly tacos.
I like it.
Personally, my favorite bait is a squid bait. I think a lot of people have gotten away from them because they get a little beat up, but that's where my confidence is. And my confidence is in a J hook. I like a 7691 10-0.
I'm a J hook.
And I like to put them a little bit, put them in a vise and offset them a little. It's not mandatory. RJ Boy ain't doing that, and I hook a bunch of fish on his baits. And when it comes down to, I've lost so many swordfish where the circle hook goes around their bill and kind of gets them like this, and then you're constantly fighting them like this, and they get to the boat and they kind of go up and down, it slides off. And so for me, I've lost some of that. Well, I'm sitting here showing them, but it goes around their bill. Obviously, Chris has figured that out. He's figured out how to catch them on a circle hook. For me, J hook, if you just leave the rod in the rod holder when you're getting a bite, two things are going to happen. Well, three things. He may just not eat it eventually, and I don't know if you're going to hook that fish either way.
Right.
But he's either going to go down and get hooked, or he's going to eat the bait and go up, and the weight pulling against him, is going to hook them. I think where I see most fish not caught is people trying to set the hook.
Human error. Roddy Rodholder takes all the human error out of it.
He does.
For sure.
I mean,
we talk about that a lot on here.
I feel like we're at 90% with the J hook, and I don't want to go away from it. Do we gut hook more fish? Yeah, I think you get a better fight with the circle hook. And I've tweaked the idea of just trying it again, and I've got some different ideas on how I'd probably rig them now versus how I would rig them back then.
But it gets back to, and we talk about this all the time, hunting, fishing, no matter what it is, you got to be confident in what you're doing, especially you're going to sit out there for hours and hours and hours waiting on one bite.
Confidence is your best technique.
Yeah, and if you go 1,500 feet down, you don't want to be second guessing what you got down.
And when I have customers, I feel that pressure on me. They come to fish with me to catch that fish.
Right.
And the J hook gives me the confidence to take them out there and say, look, I feel real confident that if we can get out there and find the fish and start getting bites, we're going to catch the fish. I don't, you'll lose your customer quick if you start getting a bunch of bites and no action.
Yeah.
No hookups.
They're like, well, this guy don't know what he's doing.
Right.
So we've got the rod, we've got the reel. We talked about drag setting some, but we've all heard the tried and true 30% of your main line is where you need to set your drag, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to that braid strength, what are you guys rigging up with as your main line on daytiming?
65 to 100 braid.
Yeah, 65. I'd say 65 and 80 are probably the way to go. 80 is a good compromise between all of it because you have more than enough strength. I mean, 80-pound braid breaks on average, and brand is almost irrelevant at the point. If it's a Spectre Dyneema-based braid, 80 pound is going to break probably around 120, 130 pounds. Now, you can factor in some loss of strength from depending on what knots you use, this and that. If you're using, 100% connections to, for your line, you shouldn't have any issue with strength. Main thing is diameter. I notice a huge difference on heavy current days when I'm fishing the 65 versus the 80 versus the 100, whether I can keep my line vertical to see those bites. Like Angelo was saying, it's like if you can't keep straight over your baits and keep your lines vertical, it's very hard to see the effect of not only your actual fixed weight on your tip, but seeing those little taps on there. So the thinner the diameter, the better you're going to see the bites, the better you're going to be able to keep your line vertical. All of us pretty much are going to be using anywhere from, like Dustin said, 65 to 100. And then we usually incorporate a long wind-on leader, anywhere from 75 to 150 feet long. I usually use them 150 feet or so. Generally 130 to 150 pound. I used to use 200 pound. I've gotten to where I like the little bit thinner wind-on leaders. I think it's one less thing that has drag in the water, especially. But that's the general rig, and then we usually have some kind of loop fixed on the wind-on anywhere from 75 to 100 feet from the actual bait. And the reason for that distance being that far from the bait is if you are actively teasing the fish and dropping the bait, if you have, or if you're just trying to reacquire bottom, realize where the bottom is, if you drop that thing too fast and your weight is too close to the bait, you end up with more tangles because your bait is now riding up your leader. If you have it spaced out real far, it takes that much longer for your bait to try to track over to your main line. So that's pretty much the basic rigging.
And I've also, recently started carrying not only a setup that, as Chris was talking about with loop-to-loop connection, I started fishing some lighter line, some 100-pound or maybe 150, but I fix it, especially the 100, I'll fish my braid instead of a loop-to-loop connection. I'll put an FG knot to my fluorocarbon and I'll use that instead of a wind-on leader. I have a loop, I have my wax loop and all on there, but I kind of, I think a lot of the places I fish, I'm safe a lot of times because the fish are, like Angelo said, a big one's 150 pounds. Now, if I was fishing somewhere where I was, where they're catching 400 and 500 pounders on the regular, the loop-to-loop would always. But I like sometimes being able to fish that, the braid with an FG knot to the fluoro instead of using the wind-on. But it's just something different that I've started doing.
That's really good info, though. I would, and that's what I love about doing these podcasts is because we can bring up a topic and think about the big picture, but then you talk about the diameter making a difference on those heavy current days, and we've all been out there and can't get our stuff to work right, and it's so frustrating.
You think about, you have literally a quarter mile or more line out, the different currents at that, you don't just have a surface current, you might have mid-level currents even. You have a lot of things that are affecting where your bait is on the bottom or where you hope it's at near the bottom. So anything that can tip the odds in your favor, you should definitely do. Skimping on rigging, skimping on time on rigging, or saying, well, that's complicated, I'm just going to do it the easy way. You spend all that time and money to go out there doing this. I want to make sure that all my gear is correct. I want to make sure that it's as strong as it could possibly be. And so that when Big Mo does show up and she screws up and eats my bait, I want to make sure that I have every advantage on my side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, something for the people that are, just getting started or want to go out and do it. When you go, carry multiple wind-on leaders. Don't just carry one or two weights. Carry, several different weights, several different sizes, 5s to 8s, maybe some smaller. But, you don't want to go all the way out there, drop a bait, and your wind-on be wrapped up when you reel it up. And then you're done for the day because you only carry one wind-on. And if you go to the bait shop and buy your wind-ons, $40 a piece. But carry a few. Don't go with one. The gas is way more expensive than the wind-ons.
Oh, yeah.
So, Angelo, you talked about squid being your favorite bait. This is probably going to be my favorite section of this show because everybody's got their own little thing that they like. And I have caught a lot of swordfish on squid, but I hate touching those big, nasty purple. It makes your hands burn. So they're not my favorite bait for as far as having to rig them, but they do work great. You like the bonita belly. You like the squid. Chris, do you have any favorite baits that differ from what Andrew said?
I'm actually with Angelo, even though, and it's going to sound hypocritical, I do, if I'm daytime fishing, my first bait down, probably my second bait, probably my third bait down are going to be bonita or mahi strips or whatever I can find, whole ladyfish, all kinds of stuff. But one thing about squid, I guess the reason more daytime guys don't use squid as much is because they do tend to get beat up more. And before we started recording, we were just freelance talking about baits, and one of the things Angelo brought up, and I've seen it a million times, is squid are cannibals. They love to eat each other. And unlike when you're getting more common bycatch like oilfish or pomfret, where you can see they're beating up your bait, you don't know squid are down there just completely, laying waste to this bait that you took 10 minutes to rig. So when you do use squid, you have to check your baits more periodically. But when the bite is slow and you're having a hard time getting baits, or you're having a hard time getting a fish to commit, he's hit a bait several times but wouldn't eat it, you drop a squid down there, it gets eaten. There's no doubt about it. It is the better bait. It's just not the tougher bait.
So for me, like you guys like to drop the meat baits down first because you're less likely to have little critters like squid eating them. For me, I'd rather keep my meat baits, drop what I feel is the bait I have the most confidence, which is, I think, is squid. That's just naturally what those fish are feeding on. And then if I have issues with that getting eaten, I swap out to a meat bait. I think the squid are easier to rig. I can rig that bait really quickly, whereas like bonita belly, mahi belly, that's a little bit more involved rigging.
We could get into rigging, but I don't think it would come through well in a podcast.
No, that's a YouTube video. YouTube that.
But YouTube it and practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
But when you drop down these bonita bellies, aren't you using a squid imitation kind of a skirt when you do that?
Well, that skirt is just, to me, because the way that bait is rigged, is just kind of holding everything in place and keeping current from blowing that kind of.
Yeah, it's a protector.
It makes it more streamlined.
Yeah.
What about you, Dustin? What's your favorite bait?
So I like the bonita belly for sure. Any belly meat. It doesn't have to be the bonita. I like the mahis. I've used barracuda. I like a mullet. I also like the ladyfish. The ladyfish is good, especially if the fish are biting and not committing to it. You drop the ladyfish, and when they bite, it's like an explosion of scales and just taste. But I will agree with Chris and Angelo, the squid is the best bait. It's the best bait. That's what they like to eat the most. But you will drop your squid and get hit, and that bait be done. It just gets mangled. And that may be from not rigging it as well. You can practice rigging it better. But like Angelo said, he could rig that the quickest. I'm the opposite. With the strip bait, I feel like I can take that and strip it and cut the meat down and have that bait rigged in just a few minutes because I only put minimal stitches in it. I really don't spend a lot of time rigging it. I rig the top, get it good and tight, slide a skirt down, and I tie that skirt to it. And the skirt is what really, lines it up. Once I have my hook secure, that's all I'm worried about, really.
All right, so we've established the rod, the reel, the line, the hooks, how to hook a fish, where to fish for them, what the best bait is. I think it was pretty unanimous across the board that the best quote-unquote bait to get bit is a squid, but there's some challenges with squid and, and their toughness and things of that nature. But now I want to hit on something that's a contentious, we talked about it a little bit before, but that's the electric versus manual debate. Personally, and this is not at all meant to throw shade on anybody who wants to catch a fish with electric, but I just think that you miss the true experience of a swordfish if you don't feel and fight that fish manually.
I fully agree.
I don't know how you guys feel about it, and that's not really what I want to talk about, though, is that electric reels, I feel like where they're valuable is in retrieval. I mean, I don't want to fight a fish on an electric reel, just personally. But if I got to reel a bait up 1,200 feet or 1,500 feet to check it, I'd be cool pushing a button and relaxing a little bit, letting that come up. So when it comes to that, what do you guys like? What works best, Angelo? What do you like?
For me, this is what my first thought is. If you go do this enough, electric reel is great is a great reel for prospecting. It's a great reel for retrieving baits. But it's not a great reel, in my opinion, if you're going to fish more than one rod. And here's the reason why. Periodically, you're going to hook a double. It just is going to happen at some point, and you've got to be connected to where you're at by a cord. Like, if for us, we're kind of like, we've done that 3 different occasions, and being able to go over and underneath the other angler is, to me, key. And then, you've got a situation where you have low gear, high gear, and how fast you can retrieve. So when you're fishing one rod, you'll see some guys, when they get bit, they'll drive the boat off too, especially because I'd say half the time the fish don't pull down, they come up to kind of get the slack. And you can't do that if you're fishing 2 rods. You can't drive the boat off a lot of times. It's just not a situation that's going to be advantageous to you. So, and that's why I really like the Talica 50. It's a really high. When it's in high gear, you can pick up a ton of line real quick. So if you're sitting right over the top, and this is how you get 2 fish on, by the way, is if you leave that other bait down, because we'll do that. If you got 2 baits down, to crank your other bait up the second you hook up, it's not the right move. Because you don't know, you might have a little pup, you're going to get the fish in 10 minutes. You may pull the hook in the first 2 minutes of the fight. I want to see what's going on. And a lot of times if you hook one fish, you're going to hook a second fish pretty soon thereafter. So that's just my thoughts, on top of just, hey, look, it's a big fish. If you're grouper fishing, electric reels are great. If you want to honor that fish, fight it like a man.
Yeah, yeah.
I like to fish both. I mean, I fish the LP, the hooker, and the hand crank. I prefer for my customers to fight the fish on the hand crank, because as Angelo said, just respecting that fish, because it is something special about catching it. But, I'm also not going to tell a customer that wants to pay me to take him fishing that, we're not going to use the electrics if he wants to. If he wants to use the electric, I'm going to use it. Just because, it's their trip. If it makes them feel good at night, we'll do it. As he said, prospecting, the electric reel is awesome when you're prospecting or trying to, find all new spots, because it makes everything a lot faster. The hand cranky is great. There's a couple of other ones, but the reel cranky. The biggest problem I have with the reel cranky is the batteries, in drills. We'll go out there and short a drill out or burn batteries up. It's just the salt water and, electronics. But the electric reels are a lot of fun. It's just you're not honoring that fish the way it should be with a hand crank.
I like it.
I've never used one of them electric things.
And it's always out of the rod holder. It's not like you're putting it in the harness and then hitting the button.
Well, and I mean, getting back to what Angelo was saying, and that's why I love getting the nuance of this, because you think, oh, well, that's just great. I just push the button and catch fish, right? Well, I didn't even think about the fact that you got to be hooked up. And how many times have we had to run a swordfish around the boat, as opposed to needing to move the boat? It's a lot easier to just go, and move that fish where you need to move them by doing it.
And as he was talking about, when you hook multiple fish, I've definitely lost fish, lose both fish, after their lines get crossed when you hook a double, because, as he said, when you hook one and you have another bait out, there's a real good opportunity you're going to hook another fish.
Absolutely.
They travel together a lot.
I like that. That's good stuff on the electric versus besides being a wuss if you catch one on electric.
I also think that your likelihood of landing a fish to me is better on manual because you feel the fish, you can react to the fish, when the fish is surging. It's not that to me, when you're fishing out of a rod holder, there's a delay in all that information because you're waiting to see the rod you're
There's
watching the rod
you gotta
load.
have the feel, man.
You don't have the feel. You don't know when you're supposed to be easing off versus when you should be taking.
And that's a big part of fishing, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. My favorite story, I told it earlier in the show, in landing the fish. So we're down there. We got our baits down. We got them in front of a fish. We got a fish on. We've just electric cranked him up to the boat. Hopefully we've manually caught this fish, but now we got this fish to the top of the water. And I've seen it go both ways where you got a fish comes up belly up and all you got to do is put the gaff in him and he's yours. And I've also seen it where they come up and they do some crazy stuff at the top of the water.
Jump across the bow.
Right. So let's talk about landing a swordfish and let's break that down. And really, when it comes to any kind of big game fishing, you got to have teamwork, and everybody on the boat's got to understand what their role is and not have to talk about it. I'll just say my biggest pet peeve in big game fishing is a captain or a deckhand who starts screaming.
You don't
never,
get that with me.
I mean,
I've never helped a single situation.
Ever. I mean, just
makes it so much more stressful.
Don't yell. But
it's
anyway,
already a stressful situation.
What do you do? So you got this big leader. You got a heavy weight on there. How do you land a fish? Are you wiring that fish up just like you would any billfish?
I try to, once I get my weight off, that to me, that's the biggest. You fight that fish up and you get to your wax loop where you have your weight attached. Once I get that weight off, that's when the fight really, that's when it's really good for me. And you get that fish boat side, it takes a crew, and a lot of times it's weird because I'll be fishing with just me and one other guy. A lot of times fun fishing.
So y'all are wind-ons. So you don't necessarily need a wire man specifically, right?
So I don't grab the line.
Right.
I fight it all the way to to my barrel swivel. When the barrel swivel gets to the tip, the fish is usually close enough I can harpoon it or gaff it. Most of the time, 90% of the time, I gaff the fish. I don't harpoon them just because I never get it out. I mean, if I get it out, then I feel like, I got the harpoon out. Now we're going to look at it all day. And then when I hook a fish, I'm like, it's too late to get the harpoon out. I like just to gaff the fish, but, the harpoon is good to have, especially if I have had situations where I hook really big fish, get them up to the boat, have a, somewhat of a tangle, and then that fish be there, and I could have hit it with a harpoon but never get it because all I had was the gaff or the flying gaff. And I think a lot of people, charter fishermen, especially some of the guys in Venice, they use that flying gaff instead of the harpoon because they get to release more fish. Because if you have the harpoon, you can hit him out there a lot further. If you got to get him close enough to hit him with the gaff, you'll lose him a lot of fish in between that distance. Once he gets close to the boat.
So you feel like harpoon is a critical piece of kit if you're planning on killing swordfish?
I guess if to build your confidence, yeah.
The main thing about the harpoon is it buys you an early shot.
Right.
And I'm all about. I'm actually with Dustin. I don't care for harpoons. I don't care for that basket of rope and all this stuff all over the place. And if the fish gets close, when you've got to the end game and you've worked that fish close enough, most of the time we can get that fish within gaffing range, no problem. Where it becomes advantageous with sword fishing, swords are funny. Sometimes, you hear he's taking off on a couple good runs, you follow him for a little while, and all of a sudden he's coming up nice and easy, and before you know it, you've got this fish is at an easy harpoon range, and he's just kind of laying there. Now, in 2 seconds, he may kick back in and burn off 300 yards of line. They do it all the time, but if you have a harpoon ready, you could end that fight, at a moment's notice right then. So there's push-pull to harpoons. I have a love-hate relationship with them. I'd say it's probably more hate than love, but I can't argue with the fact that a lot of what would have been very long fights have been ended shorter because of a harpoon being on board.
So we're talking about in-game, and to me, swordfish come up one of two ways usually. They roll up on their belly and tucker it out, and you just stick a gaff in them and pull them into the boat.
Or they're trying to sink the boat.
Or they're trying to sink the boat and kill you.
Or they come up, and here again, another reason I like the hand crank versus the electric is it makes you're able to maneuver around the boat because they get when they're pissed and they're up on top, they get real erratic and they're shooting under the boat. They're changing directions real quick. They're jumping. And like that just kind of allows the angler to kind of move around. I mean, sometimes the boat captain can't spin the boat fast enough to like clear motors, especially on an outboard boat. And so to me, that's the hand crank and the ability for that angler to move around, back off drag real quickly, understand what's going on with the fish, head shakes, all that. You can almost kind of feel before a fish is going to go do something when you're harnessed in and fighting that fish. And then the harpoon, I'm like these guys. We always have one. We take it out. We got the basket with the buoys, and we've used it, and we've needed it, and we've had to throw the buoys before. But 90% of the time or more, you don't need that. A stick gaff is all you need to catch almost every fish you're going to get. And like I said, we're talking to people that may be thinking about going and getting it. I mean, I'd say, go out with your stick gaff. I mean, the biggest one I ever killed, over 300 pounds, we could have killed that fish with a gaff. I mean, we didn't need a harpoon. I'll tell you, and the biggest one we ever lost, which to me would have been a state record, had we had a harpoon, we probably would have caught it.
Yeah, that's the same case with me. I definitely would have had my biggest fish if I would have had the harpoon out, but, I preferred to not have it.
But then again, I guess a harpoon's not IGFA either.
Right?
True.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very valuable thing to have on board. I think people need to know how to use it before they try to use it at that moment.
Too.
Because it can be dangerous, and if you're not aware of your abilities with that harpoon, you can actually end up
you'll lose the fish.
busting the fish off with it as much as landing it.
Definitely.
But there's a reason why almost everybody that sword fishes has a harpoon on board. Whether they use it or not is their choice, of course. Like Angelo said, his biggest fish he landed with just a straight gaff. I did as well, and I've had a number of fish that when we got them up next to, but I just build them like a marlin or anything like that. When you get that fish of a lifetime on, or a 200+ pound sword, and he gives you that early shot on him, if you do have the harpoon ready and you're decent enough with it, you could end the fight right there.
Yeah. Well, we use this platform to talk about how to get better at fishing, how to catch more fish, and one of the things I like about swordfish is that you get to kill them. I mean, I do. I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
that.
It's fun.
Blue marlin, they're fun to catch and they do cool stuff, but we let them all go. I like to bring those swordfish out and eat one.
Yeah.
But the question I want to ask you guys is, how do you feel like the fishery's doing out there? Are we in good shape, and where do you see it headed?
I don't think that the stock is in danger necessarily, but I've always leaned far more towards the conservation side of it than from the meat fisherman side. Every fishery is healthy until you overfish it. I don't think, as far as every fish I've ever cleaned, swordfish you can get about a 70% yield of body weight to what you take home. That's incredible. I've never cleaned another fish that you take home as much meat from. So our regulations on them, about 10 years ago, swordfish were declared fully recovered, the Atlantic stocks. Instead of keeping the limit where it was, they actually increased. They gave us another fish. We can now keep 4 per boat. Our limit didn't change. It's 47 inches. 47 inches to me is pretty shameful.
It's pretty small fish.
On a fish that can reach over 1,000 pounds. I definitely think the limit should have been increased a while ago. I think that the bag limit should have been decreased, not increased. You do not need 4 swordfish on a boat. You don't need 3 on a boat. I'm okay with 2 because there are days you get out there and you get in a smaller grade of fish. If you get a couple of 80 to 100 pound swordfish, that's a lot of meat. That's plenty when you get back. You've had a really good day. If you were to decrease it to just 1 per vessel, I don't think you need to go that conservation minded into it, and it makes it to where it kind of discourages folks from even wanting to go out there and try it in the first place.
And I think too, once you get out there, it's like if you kill a 70 pounder. And then you pretty much got to decide, do we just want to go in if you're at one fish, and then if you don't go in, you're gonna
release that 500 pounder. Because it's gonna happen.
I'm not gonna take customers out and bring back 4 fish.
Right.
I'm not gonna do
That's
it.
man.
I'm not gonna take customers out and bring back 4 big tunas. I'm just not gonna do it because I'm trying to take more people to do it. Now I will take people and we'll bring back 2 fish. I mean, but I'm not trying to take customers out to feed them and all their friends. because if I do that and everybody else does that, then we're going to deplete the resource. I think the resource is fine and is healthy as long as we keep out long line fishing and more of the commercial fishing side of it. But as hook and line, I think your fishery is fine as long as you don't get into anything else.
I'm just going to repeat what these guys said. If you're going to go out there and do this, it can be boring. It can be a long day, right? When you're fishing 1 to 2 rods, bring a Magma grill, some good tunes, some good food that you can throw on the grill. Bring a couple rods set up to catch a dolphin or something that's going to swim by your boat. Bring a couple rods set up to throw poppers or throw a lob bait to tunas. A lot of times that happens late in the afternoon or just in the middle of the day. You'd be surprised what will swim up to your boat. Have something if you want to pitch out to a mako. And I'll say this, have another rod set up. I've had this happen a handful of times where we reel up a bait, or we're fighting a swordfish and another one comes up.
Oh yeah.
Have that second rod ready to pitch. There's going to be opportunity. It's not going to be a lot, but that might be the opportunity of a fish of a lifetime is that one. So that's going to get you through the day.
Here's how I want to wrap it up. I told my favorite swordfish story. I want to hear you guys. If you guys got any special war stories,
battle stories
that you want to share, I want to hear it. Angelo, what's your favorite swordfish story?
Mine it's about a fish we lost.
Oh no!
Are
we going to sing the blues over here?
You know what? We ended up catching a lot of fish that day or that night, actually. But we were just then getting into sword fishing, and we're fishing this little spot north of Petronas. Early spring, slit calm, nobody's out there. And we get out there, probably 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and right about 4 o'clock. And back then, I had my little 23-foot contender. It was me and one other guy, this kid named Brian Beeson, hell of a fisherman. And we hook up. We had an 80 wide with a chair rod, and we had one rod holder that had a backing plate, and that's where we fought the fish from. I tell you, one of the hard my right arm was just tired. This, we 2 hours, we never saw the fish. And it starts angling up. I'm like, ooh, get ready, get a camera out. It's about to jump. And so he's fiddling with the camera, and the fish kind of jumps going away. And I could say, that was a really wide fish. I'd never seen a fish that wide. I said, dude, we need to have every implementation of kill out because it's a big fish.
You got your shotgun?
And then, shortly thereafter, about 20 feet behind the boat, he kind of goes broadside. And the trip prior to that, we'd caught a mako close to 600 pounds. And this fish, swordfish and makos have very similar body types. That body looked like the same kind of body that was on that, close to 500-pound swordfish, close to 600-pound swordfish. I'm like, dang. And so right before dark, the fish is it's just tuckered out, I get the swivel right up close to the rod tip, and Brian goes to pick up the harpoon. And when he looks down to pick up the harpoon, that fish shook its head, and the hook just falls out, and he just kind of glides away.
Oh.
Man, when he popped up, the rod was sitting straight, and I go, dude, you would not believe what happened. I was like, you just kind of quiet there for a second. Caveat, we caught 7 of them that night fishing at night.
Nice.
And one of the weirdest things we ever caught that night was we caught a stingray, not a cow nose ray or any. It was a sure enough stingray. It was black on top on our 200-foot bait. Weird.
That is weird.
How
So that's probably what really fired you up too. A big loss can sometimes really stoke the fire more better than a big catch.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, the fish I remember most of my life, not just talking about swordfish, I mean fish all across the board. The one I remember the most as far as losing, because if you fished, you've lost a lot of fish. But the one I remember losing most.
I didn't have lost fish.
Never? You guys need to take me fishing. I've got to learn some things.
Just don't go anymore. That's right.
I could definitely tell you the story about losing what would have easily been my biggest sword. It was well over 400 pounds. We hooked it deep dropping for tile fish. So we hooked it on an electric and something not up to the task. But actually, my favorite swordfish is actually one of the smallest ones I've ever caught. And it's because me and my friend Adam Peoples, who has One Shot Charters over near Destin, Adam is definitely one of the top swordfish guys in the Gulf. Very consistent, very dedicated. one of the guys that, when he's not chartering, he's out there on his personal time fun fishing for him. And we had the cool idea. I do a lot of kayak fishing, both inshore and off the beaches, but we had a cool idea a few years ago. Let's take the kayak out there and use a manual gear, get in the kayak, drop a bait from the kayak, fight and land a swordfish from the kayak. And the first time we did it, caught 3 pomfrets, which was a nice workout, but out of 5 drops, we did not connect on a sword. But the second time we got out there, it was a little rough. I didn't get in the kayak immediately, but over the course of 4 drops from the boat, we caught 2 swords, lost another one, and caught a pomfret. So it's like, all right, the bite's on. Let's do this. Throw the kayak in. Got the bait down there, and it didn't take too long, before I started getting hits, teased the fish, and came tight. And it's funny because you'd think with the way we were acting when I got the swordfish to the kayak that I just landed this 200-pound thing. Right? No, this thing was. I don't think the swordfish weighed 30 pounds. I mean, it was a little pup, but the fact that we took a kayak out there and I deployed. We talked about this deployment that obviously sounds very complicated. Well, to do that from the kayak, get a bait down there without tangling, feeling the bites, and then be able to bury a hook at a quarter mile from this plastic boat and get the fish to. We were laughing hysterically, and I'm sitting there holding this swordfish up in my hands. That tells you how big it was. Yeah. Holding it up, but kind of above my head. I think I was happier with that swordfish than any other I've ever had.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment, man.
Yeah,
and I believe still, I think I'm the only person to have. There's been a few swordfish caught in kayaks, but it's usually by accident. I think I'm the only person that's actually targeted a swordfish from a kayak and caught one. So,
world record holder on the show today. How about you, Dustin?
I would say this. My best story is kind of like Chris. It was definitely a small fish, but my wife is not a fisherman. She does not fish. She never caught a red snapper. I mean, I've taken her. I've seen her catch bluegill, but this past summer she was like, "Well, what are you going?" It was an off day, and she said, "Well, I'm gonna go fishing with you." And I'm like, "Okay." I've never taken her in the Gulf, and I've known her for over 15 years. I mean, I've never taken her in the Gulf. So she gets an ear patch, and we go out in the Gulf, and I take my cousin and his little son, and we go out and we fish, and we get out there and the weather turns pretty quick, but we hook a fish and lose it, and then we hook another fish, and we wind up catching, and it's like Chris says, it's like a 30-pound fish, but it was really good to have her on the boat. That was the first and the last time she'd been out in the Gulf. So hopefully I can get her out there some more, but that was the best for me.
And man, isn't that what it's all about?
That's right.
Everything we talk about on here, technique-wise, it's really all about getting outside with people you love and enjoy being with, spending time together, and making memories so that you can relive it when you're not.
I'm ready for my kids to be able to go.
I love Butch. I know which story Butch is going to tell because I've heard this.
Yeah, there's no doubt which one sticks out in my mind the most. We were on the Escape doing an overnight trip, and we weren't going to go sword fishing at all. We were just doing deep drop stuff and, doing near shore amberjack and stuff like that. I don't remember what time of year it was. Maybe fall. We had a 30 wide. It's probably about 50 years old, I'm pretty sure.
The first 50 wide, the prototype?
It's the one that you throw out, in between snapper spots, just with a lead head on it trying to catch king mackerel or whatever, with 50-pound monofilament on it. And it was just a beautiful night. It was perfect. Skipper was like, let's go chug off, 15 more miles, and we'll be in swordfish ground. Let's just throw one out. All right. Got there about sunset, put one down. Sure enough, about sunset, it was on. And it was a big fish. And about 2 hours into the fight, that 30 wide completely blew his guts out. So the only way you could gain any ground on the fish is about 2 hours in, I was holding the spool. The guy was strapped in. I was holding the spool. He would pump, and the only way you could do it was how you'd have to slam it into full, not strike. You'd have to go all the way into full, and he could gain some ground on that. And there was no drag. So I would have to back it all the way off, and I would have to grab the spool. He'd have to pump again, slam it into full, gain some more ground. We did that for about an hour.
God, what a nightmare.
And my brother, Captain Skipper, said, this ain't going to work. We did have a 50-wide Shimano downstairs, which was full of line. He said, well, go down there and pull, 500 yards off of it, splice it. Well, I'll pull way forward. We'll keep tension on it with our hands, and then we'll splice them together and then reel put the splice way back on the reel. That way we'll never see it again. So we did all that. I put a splice in it, and pop, line broke. All right. Did another splice. So we got all the line. We reeled like 200 yards of line. Put that splice way down there. We'd never see that splice again. As soon as she got tight, There goes that splice. Bing, 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 bing. I was like, I mean, it's over with. There's no way. About another hour and a half, and that fish came up, and we harpooned it and killed it. I think about 300 pounds. We didn't really. We gutted it and everything. Yeah. It was wild.
Crazy stuff.
And we backed down for like 4.5 hours. I was sucking diesel fuel, throwing up off the back. Joys. It was an awesome night.
You make it sound so much fun.
Yeah. It was great.
Very glamorous.
You guys should definitely do that.
Well, man, this has been great. I've been wanting to do this show for a while. Appreciate you guys joining me and sharing your tips and your knowledge. And
glad to be here.
You know, I hope we've sufficiently confused everyone enough that if they want to go sword fishing, they look up
at least put out an inquiry.
Dustin Bedgood and go put together a trip with you. Dustin, if folks want to do that, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is 251-377-7135 or either at fedupcharters@gmail.com.
And if you want to get more information or go pick up some tackle and really do a deep dive on daytime sword fishing, nighttime sword fishing, or whatever it may be, and want to go talk to Chris Vecsey. Chris, how can folks reach out to you and learn a little more about this?
You can find me Wednesday through Saturday. I work at Sam's Bait and Tackle in Orange Beach on Canal Road. You can call the store, 251-981-4245. You can find us on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, however that be it. But come by the store. I'll gladly, if you're wanting to get out there and do it yourself, and put in some time on it and really feel that pride of catching your own swordfish, come see me at the shop. I'll tell you everything you need to do.
And Angelo, if somebody wants to buy a condo, a house, a boating property over in Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, Perdido, Key area, and that way when they want to go sword fishing and it's
just
pretty, all they got to do is drop the boat in the water and roll out.
That's the way to do it.
How do they get in touch with you?
You know what? Just go to my Facebook page, The Coastal Connection. My phone number's on there. You can DM me. And look, I'll say this. I would suggest going and fishing with Dustin that first time. I mean, look, you're going to cut your learning curve so much. It's going to save you a ton of money.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Chris can definitely get you set up with everything and tell you how to do it, but there's something about seeing it, right?
Yeah.
Chris, you can go fish with Dustin. And you can come talk to Chris. Have him set you up with all the right gear, right tackle, everything you need. And then, you know what? If you're feeling froggy, hit me up, and I'll sell you a condo.
That's right. I love it. We appreciate you being on, guys. Talk to y'all soon.
All right, thank you. Bye.
This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report has been brought to you by Geico. Call Ron Davis, Geico agent, at 251-445-0053 or visit him online at geico.com/mobile-al. Also brought to you by Advanced Transmission in Spanish Fort. Give the professionals a call who have been trusted on the Gulf Coast for over 25 years at 251-626-6061 or check them out online at www.advanced-transmission.com.
This week's Saltwater Fishing Report is brought to you by Angelo, DePaola, the Coastal Connection with EXP Realty, your boating and beach property specialist. Check me out on Facebook at Angelo DePaola Realtor, the Coastal Connection, or call me direct at 850-287-3440.
Also brought to you by Coastal Conservation Association of Alabama. Check them out at CCAAlabama.org.
And also brought to you by Daycool Heating and Air, your home performance specialist. Contact them at 251-260-3858 or check them out online at www.daycoolair.com. License number AL07028. And also brought to you by Fishbites. Check out their full line of freshwater, saltwater, tackle, and apparel at fishbites.com.